Mr. Speaker, right now our nation is grappling with a border crisis that has been manufactured by Democratic policies that brazenly reward those that break our laws to enter our country illegally. My home state of New York is drowning due to policies that transformed our state into a sanctuary for illegal immigration. Democratic leaders in New York City, Albany, here in Congress, in the White House, they have turned their back on lawful Americans, choosing instead to roll out the red carpet for illegal immigrants with housing, clothing, financial incentives, all paid for by the American taxpayers. The gravy train's alive and well. They're not even hiding it anymore. One of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, who happens to represent New York City in this body, openly called for more illegal immigration for her district because she says she, quote, needs more people in her district for redistricting purposes. This absurd notion pushed by my colleagues across the aisle that these non-citizens should shape the future of our nation is completely unconstitutional. They are corroding the essence of American citizenship, turning it into a political commodity. The Equal Representation Act is our line in the sand. It is time to end the charade by rewarding states like New York and California for this reckless sanctuary antics that undermine our laws.
Look, if you strip away all the bombast and all the rhetoric, the gentleman just basically delivered a tirade about immigration, but never addressed the fact that their legislation is totally unconstitutional. If you want to deal with immigration, we had a bill, and the bill would have added hundreds of Border Patrol officers and asylum officers and judges. And the Republican leadership in the Senate said it was a great deal. They got most of what they wanted. It was a great compromise. And yet who didn't want it? Donald Trump, alas, still the putative leader of those who are left in the GOP, Lincoln's party. Donald Trump didn't want it because he doesn't want a border solution. He wants a border crisis. So they're left with a bunch of completely superficial, empty bills like this one, which I doubt it'll even pass the House, but if it does pass the House, it certainly won't pass the Senate. It'll never be signed by the president, and it will be struck down immediately by the Supreme Court. So why are we wasting our time on that instead of getting to the legislation that actually a majority of the Senate was behind? I wish one of my colleagues would address that.
H.R. 7109 has three components. Number one, it requires the Census Bureau to include a citizenship question on the decennial census questionnaire. Number two, the bill directs that this information be used to ensure fair representation by requiring only citizens be included in the apportionment base. And number three, a severability clause. The citizenship question is no stranger to the census questionnaire. Commerce also noted, quote, every census between 1820 and 2000, with the exception of 1840, asked at least some of the population about their citizenship or place of birth. Between 1820 and 1950, the question was asked of all households. Between 1960 and 2000, it was asked of about 1/4 to 1/6 of the population. That's another quote from the Commerce case. This isn't a uniquely American practice. Even the United Nations recommends collecting citizenship information via a census, as noted by, again, the Commerce Court. Australia, Canada, France, Indonesia, Ireland, Germany, Mexico, Spain, and the United Kingdom ask about citizenship in their respective censuses. Is the United States to be the only North American country not to inquire about citizenship in its census protocols?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. The last president tried to include a citizenship question on the decennial census in 2020 and tried to count only U.S. citizens for the purposes of census and reapportionment. And the effort failed miserably in court for obvious reasons. Section 2 of the 14th Amendment states that apportionment of seats in the House of Representatives is based on a count of, quote, the whole number of persons in each state, unquote. Persons being the all-encompassing category much larger than that of citizens. When the framers wanted to impose a citizenship requirement in the text of the Constitution, they knew how to do it. Take the President of the United States, for example. It says that you've got to be a born U.S. citizen in order to run for president. Some of the historians tell us that was because Thomas Jefferson was trying to block Alexander Hamilton from running for president. He was foreign born. But in any event, it was very clear that you needed to be a born U.S. citizen to run for president. For those of us in the House, it says we must have been a citizen for at least 7 years. So there are lots of citizenship requirements in the Constitution. There's no citizenship requirement for being counted in the census and for purposes of reapportionment. On the contrary, the census and reapportionment have included all persons, including non-citizens like permanent resident green card holders, since 1790. That's been the unbroken practice since the beginning of the Republic. And this point was made even more clearly and emphatically by the Supreme Court in its unanimous 2016 decision in Evenwell versus Abbott, rejecting precisely the argument my distinguished friend is trying to make. Like this legislation itself, Evenwell involved a challenge to congressional apportionment based on a total count of the entire population instead of a limited count of the total citizen or voter population. Justice Ginsburg held for a unanimous court that Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, quote, retained total population as the congressional apportionment base. She cited the speech made on this floor on the floor of the Senate by Senator Jacob Howard upon introduction of Section 2 of the 14th Amendment. Quote, the basis of representation is numbers. The committee adopted numbers as the most just and satisfactory basis, and this is the principle upon which the Constitution itself was originally framed, that the basis of representation should depend upon numbers. And such, I think, after all, is the safest and most secure principle upon which the government can rest. Numbers, not voters. Numbers, not property. This is the theory of the Constitution. My colleague needs to remember that when the Republic was founded, the vast majority of people were not citizens who could vote. Women could not vote. Children could not vote. Enslaved Americans obviously could not vote. So the census and the apportionment was for everybody who was here. That was the whole basis of the 3/5 compromise, because enslaved Americans were being counted too. What percentage should they count for purposes of reapportionment? Well, Congress arrived at 60%, 3/5. It was the southern states who were saying they should count completely for these purposes because they wanted the enslaved Americans to be enlarging and inflating the congressional delegations from the slave states. For these purposes, the northern states said no, they shouldn't count at all. They should count 0% in the apportionment, but they arrived at 3/5. But in any event, everybody agreed that everybody would be counted. And Justice Ginsburg included lots of decisive legislative authority like this, including the floor statement here in the House of Representative James Blaine, who stated that, quote, no one will deny that population is the true basis of representation. For women, children, and other non-voting classes may have as vital an interest in the legislation of the country as those who actually deposit the ballot. For all of you constitutional textualists out there, the plain reading of the text is clear as day. For all you originalists out there, the original purposes of the passage of the 14th Amendment have been carefully articulated by the Supreme Court on a unanimous basis and never rebutted. For all of you members who like to follow precedent, every apportionment since 1790 has included every single person residing in the United States, not just those lucky enough to have been given the right to vote. As the Evenwell Court noted, the 14th Amendment contemplates that, quote, representatives serve all residents, not just those eligible to vote. The constitutional meaning is indisputable, a point which settles this for those who actually want to follow the Constitution in all cases, not just when it favors our own preferred policy outcome. The House should be getting real work done instead of wasting more time on another MAGA bill that will never pass the Senate, let alone get signed by the president, much less approved by the courts. The bill is an insult, and it's an affront to the great radical Republicans who wrote the 14th Amendment. Their party was a pro-freedom, pro-union, pro-immigrant, anti-conspiracy theory, anti-know-nothing party that wanted to make sure everybody in the country was counted and made visible. The census is essential to democracy. Just as the framers endorsed Tom Paine's common sense, they endorsed a common census. But this bill would destroy the accuracy of the census, which may have something to do with its actual legislative motivation. In the 2010 census, the undercount of Hispanic citizens was 1.4%. In 2020, that number grew to 5%, with many observers crediting that jump to the Trump administration's simple attempt to add a citizenship question to the census and all of the intense publicity and rumor surrounding it. The addition of a question about citizenship will indeed deter many immigrants, including people who are permanent residents, including citizens, from completing the census. Many non-citizen immigrants who are seeking asylum or are refugees will avoid responding because of uncertainty over their status and fear of arbitrary law enforcement action. Extensive research over the last decade shows that many residents wrongly believe the Census Bureau will share their responses with other agencies. To be clear on this point, it does not. Federal law prohibits it, but that pervasive worry has prevented some people from answering questions about immigration status or responding to the census at all. Mr. Chairman, we strongly oppose this legislation as unconstitutional and unwise. It dishonors our own history and the values of the nation, and I will reserve at this point.
I'll tell you what, Mr. Speaker, what is an insult. An insult is to the American people, the citizens that live here, whose voice, whose vote is being degraded because of the horrendous immigration problem that we have at our southern border through illegal aliens coming across the border and not being addressed here in Washington, D.C. One of the lesser acknowledged issues, but equally alarming as a result of the population coming across the border illegally, is the effects of this administration's failure to secure the southern border is the illegal immigration population's influence in America's electoral process. Our democracy depends on accurate representation and electoral integrity. Voting is a coveted privilege held by American citizens, and elected representatives are responsible for serving the interests of the voters in their district. But even if not a single illegal alien casts a vote, the mere presence of illegal immigrants in the United States is having a profound impact on the outcomes of elections, skewing the representation of Americans. Mr. Bigg points out that the U.S. Constitution mandates that a census be carried out every 10 years, where everyone who is present in the United States, regardless of their citizenship and immigration status, is counted. But the Constitution does not specify whether non-citizens or illegal aliens must be counted for the purpose of apportioning House seats. You may recall that in 2016, President Trump, through executive order, added a citizenship question back to the 2020 census. The same question that had been legally asked on nearly every census since 1820 until it was removed in 1960. Not because there was anything found wrong with that question, but because the effect of illegal immigration was negligible at that time. But there's no doubt today, Mr. Speaker, that the effect of illegal immigration is significant. And I won't waste my time making that case here. We all know it. Since the illegal alien population is not evenly distributed through the nation, American citizens in some states are losing representation in Congress to illegal aliens in other states. A 2019 study by the Center for Immigration Studies estimates illegal immigrants and non-citizens who have not naturalized and do not have the right to vote impact the distribution of 26 House seats. My bill, the Equal Representation Act, would finally address this alarming undermining of American democracy by requiring a citizenship question be added back to the 2030 census, creating reporting requirements for data gathered from citizenship questions, and requiring that only U.S. citizens be counted for the purpose of congressional apportionment. Mr. Speaker, this bill will no doubt, and has no doubt, drawn criticism from those who don't want to fix this problem and who seek to gain political influence by not fixing it. They'll claim to have become experts on our Constitution. I don't see any black robes in this chamber today. They'll point to the word persons in Section 2 of the 14th Amendment as a reason why this bill should not pass. But this word carries no definition in our Constitution, and it offers multiple meanings in current law. Allow me to argue. In 1992, in Franklin versus Massachusetts, a Supreme Court case on apportionment of representatives opined the term persons to mean an individual who not only has a physical presence, but some element of allegiance to a particular place. The Census Bureau does not include foreigners who visit the United States for a vacation or a business trip in the population count, since they have no political or legal allegiance to any state or the federal government. Similarly, illegal aliens who are deportable have no allegiance.
The gentleman's time has expired.
All right.
I can yield 15 seconds.
The gentleman is recognized for 15 seconds.
Similarly, illegal aliens who are deportable have no allegiance or enduring tie to the United States. Foreigners here on visas have an allegiance politically and legally to their home countries, not to the United States. So the same logic applies to them. My bill is a common sense solution to a chronic problem impacting the very governance.
The gentleman from Arizona reserves.
Right.
The gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Thank you, Speaker. The gentleman from North Carolina observes that we don't have anybody wearing a black robe in the House of Representatives today, but you don't have to wear a black robe in order to read the Constitution, interpret the Constitution, and follow it. But if you need people with black robes, then I would urge the gentleman to read the Supreme Court's decision in Evanwell versus Abbott, where the Supreme Court unanimously found that the census and reapportionment must include the entire population, all persons, not all citizens, not all voters, the alternative suggestions that are being made today. So what do we have? Since 1790, all persons have been included in the census, in every census on a decennial basis since the beginning of the Republic. The Supreme Court rejected the theory that's being advanced by my friends in the majority today in Evanwell versus Abbott, that the Constitution requires citizens rather than persons. The gentleman from North Carolina invites us to think this has something to do with immigration. We actually had an immigration deal coming out of the Senate for hundreds of new Border Patrol officers and asylum officers and asylum judges and fentanyl detection machinery, and it was vetoed by the fourth branch of government, Donald Trump, who said he didn't want a border solution, he wanted a border crisis to run on. So despite the fact that Senator Lankford, perhaps one of the most conservative senators that we have in the Republican Party, said that this was a great deal and the best that he'd ever seen coming out of the Senate, despite the fact that Senator McConnell was for it, they blew it all up. So you judge for yourself the seriousness of the claims that they want to do something about immigration. This is another useless and needless distraction, and I would now yield 2 minutes to the distinguished gentlelady from California, Congresswoman Berrigan.
The gentlelady from California is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Ranking Member Raskin. As chair of the Hispanic Caucus, I rise today to oppose H.R. 7109. It's a bill that threatens equal and fair representation of immigrant communities. This bill requires a citizenship question on the U.S. Census, which directly undermines the Constitution's mandate for a fair and accurate count of all residents. This requirement would deprive tens of millions of immigrants their rightful access to representation and resources, even though they pay taxes and contribute to our economy. A citizenship question would have a chilling effect on participation in the census. Its accuracy would be destroyed. The census count affects the federal government and the amount it appropriates funds and resources to our communities. Republicans are effectively saying, if you're not a citizen in this country, you don't count. Even legal permanent residents, you don't count. This is absurd. Let me be clear. Immigrants are the backbone of this economy. They work the fields, they build our cities, and they contribute tirelessly to the fabric of our society. They pay over $500 billion in taxes, including taxes for Social Security and Medicare, even though undocumented immigrants can't receive benefits. Yet, despite their invaluable contributions, Republicans want to deny immigrant communities access to even more vital services and resources that they help fund through their hard-earned tax dollars. As representatives of the people, it is our duty to ensure that all members of our communities are treated with dignity and respect. Every individual, regardless of their immigration status, should have the opportunity to thrive. But H.R. 7109 does the opposite. A citizenship question on the census threatens to further marginalize immigrant communities. An undercount of the immigrant population would not only result in an unfair distribution of resources, but it will also undermine the very foundation of our democracy. That's fair representation from our government.
I thank the gentleman for yielding, Mr. Speaker. If you went out on the street today and you asked someone on this, anybody on the street, say, you know, we do a census every 10 years, we count up the number of people in the country. Do you think it's okay if we find out how many of those are citizens? That person would say, well, yeah, but aren't you already doing that? That's what they would think. All this bill says is let's count persons, like the Constitution says, let's count everyone, but let's also find out how many are citizens, because that's what should determine how congressional representation, how apportionment is done. It is so darn simple. By the way, to my good friend from Maryland on the other side, we ask all kinds of other questions on the census anyway. What's wrong with asking sort of the fundamental question, are you a citizen of this great country, the greatest country ever? That's all this does. And that is important number to get, important information to get when you're figuring out who's going to represent how many congressional members from each of the respective states. This couldn't be more simpler. I don't know why they're opposing it, but they always do. I urge a yes vote and yield back.
Well, I don't want to be in the position of lecturing my colleagues about something that they often like to say, but the Constitution is the Constitution, and nobody yet has laid a glove on the Constitution or explained how the Supreme Court erred in the unanimous Evanwell decision. None of them has been able to explain away the very plain language of the 14th Amendment, which says that it's all the persons of the states who are counted, not the citizens, and that's been the basis for both the census and the reapportionment since the country began. The rest of it just strikes me like election year political rhetoric. To the extent that we want to deal with immigration, we had a great bargain that came out of the Senate, which everybody in this body and that body seemed to be behind until they heard from Donald Trump, no, he didn't want to see any legislative progress. He wanted to be able to demagogue the immigration issue out on the campaign trail, although he's been severely undermined by all of the exposure that went to that decision. And again, I haven't heard anybody either explain why their legislation is constitutional, nor have I heard anybody explain what's wrong with the immigration package we had for hundreds of new Border Patrol officers, hundreds of new Border and Patrol and asylum judges, and a crackdown on drugs at the border. And with that, I'll yield back.